Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob, and in today's video we are going to be talking about the Eldritch Knight. Now, I thought about other videos I was going to do, but I kind of just figured in the end I've already covered Champion, I've already covered the Battle Master. Let's just finish off the fighter subclasses from the Player's Handbook and we can move on to other classes. Now, I have a lot to say about the Eldritch Knight, some of it good, some of it bad. We'll talk about that stuff more towards the end. But at first, I just kind of want to give an overview of the class. We'll take a look at some spell choices. The Eldritch Knight is so limited on spell choices that I think it kind of makes a lot of sense to go through the different options because there's just not that many, to be honest. And like I said, we'll talk about the good, the bad, and we'll have some multi-class ideas and some build ideas towards the end, of course. And just talk about this type of subclass in general, this type of character. A lot of times they're known as gishes. It goes back to the old 2nd edition Fiend folio here. There we go. With the Githyanki. The Githyanki had a subclass called the Gish, which was a fighter magic user subclass. And ever since then the name just kind of stuck. So anybody who's combining martial abilities with magic, especially arcane magic, has kind of gone down as being called a gish. Personally, I kind of hate the subclass name, but whatever. So we'll go over the basic abilities of the Eldritch Knight. I won't bother covering like action surge. I'll assume that people know the main fighter type stuff. So at level 3, you're going to get Weapon Bond. It's a 1-hour ritual, but you can do it during a short rest. And you bond yourself with the weapon, which has to stay within arm's reach the whole time. And thereafter, you cannot be disarmed unless you're incapacitated, and you can summon the weapon to you as a bonus action, which is pretty handy, especially if you have scenarios where your DM likes to capture you and throw you in prison, and you're stripped of all your weapons and armor, and you come to, and now you are completely worthless. You can be like, well, I'm not, because I'm an Eldritch Knight. Boom, weapon back, good to go. Sure, you have no armor, but you've got a weapon, and that's more than anybody else in your party is able to say. Not a bad ability. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's there. At level 7, you're going to get War Magic, and this is where you start to actually kind of feel like you're a bit of an Eldritch Knight. You can make a bonus action attack anytime you're using a cantrip, and obviously the best way to use this is to use an attack cantrip as your action, and then use your bonus action to attack. If you're using like a green flame blade or a booming blade, basically you're just getting 2 attacks in a round, which you would have had anyways at level 5, but you're also getting the added benefit of the booming blade or the green flame blade on top of that. At level 10, you're going to get Eldritch Strike. Hitting with a melee weapon, or not necessarily a melee weapon, sorry, hitting with a weapon attack will give that creature disadvantage on saving throws against your spells cast before the end of your next turn. So you could hit something on one turn, and the next turn you cast a spell on it and it's going to have disadvantage, which allows you to set up some pretty nice combos. It's especially good with action surge, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. At level 15, you get Arcane Charge. It gives you a 30-foot teleport when you use action surge, and you can choose to use the teleport either before the action surge or after. There's some flexibility there. Basically, it's like Misty Step. I don't think it's a bad ability, but the fact that you have to use it with action surge means that it's going to be kind of restricted in when you'll be able to use it. And at level 18, you're going to get the improved War Magic ability. It's basically like War Magic, except instead of getting a bonus action attack when using a cantrip, it gives you a bonus action attack when casting any spell. Now, that's not really a lot, but it's not bad. It's compared with the basic fighter chassis, let's call it, which is pretty good in my opinion. It gives you a decent set of other abilities. Some of them are really good in certain level ranges, but some of them aren't necessarily good all the way through. And part of the reason for this is because fighters just do so much damage in melee combat anyways. So if we take a look at War Magic, for example, when you first get this ability at level 7, let's say you're using a green flame blade, right? Because often you'll have a second target within 5 feet. You could attack that target twice with your 2 attacks around, or you could attack it once with a green flame blade. you still get your melee attack, you hit it, you do green flame damage to this guy in addition to the melee strike because you're level 5, so the damage is scaled up. The creature next to it is going to take damage equal to 1d8 plus whatever your int modifier is, and then you're still going to get a bonus action attack, meaning you'll still get your second attack. It's just way better than attacking twice, just mathematically speaking. The problem is that once you hit level 11, you start getting a third attack around. And if your campaign goes all the way to 20, you'll have a fourth attack around. And it's going to be very rare that that cantrip is going to be worth all those extra attacks that you could have been making. It's even worse when you consider the fact that if you want to do this like every round, for example, it pretty much just eats up your bonus action every single round. And for levels 7, 8, 9, and 10, until you get a third attack, I think that's pretty decent. You don't have a lot of other things you're probably going to do with a bonus action attack. Your supply of spells is still fairly limited. Everything you have is fairly limited, honestly. So it just gives you an extra source of damage. It gives you a bit of AoE damage, not a lot, but a bit. Or if you're using a booming blade, then it gives you, that rider that if the target willingly moves, it's going to take a bunch of extra damage on top of that. So really it's doing extra damage with the possibility of doing even more damage. And it's costing a bonus action, but I think that at that level range, the trade is probably worthwhile. I just don't know that it's worth it once you start hitting 11 plus. Not only is it taking a bonus action every round, but a third attack a round is probably better than what I would basically call 2.5 attacks a round, essentially. So that's when it really starts to fall behind. And unfortunately, improved war magic would be great if you were, say, a blade singer and you had access to high level spells and you could cast a high level spell and then still make a bonus action melee attack. That would be an amazing ability. But you have access to 4th level spells. Now by the time you're 18th level and you can start using this ability, most of your spells just aren't that effective anymore. I mean, sure, you could, cast a fireball on a group of guys that are in one space and then make a melee attack on another guy. I'm not saying that that's never going to be useful as an ability. I'm just saying that it's something that on the surface it looks very strong because you're just like, well, I'm casting a spell and then I also get a bonus action attack. Wizards don't get that. Warlocks don't get that. Pact of the Blade Warlocks would probably love to have an ability like that. But they all have good spells, and you don't. And that's the difference there. That your spells are pretty garbage, especially at high levels. So let's take a look at the spells you do have and make some decisions there. At level 1, you're going to have 3 different first level spells and 2 cantrips. And I really, really feel like one of those cantrips has got to be either Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade. And I personally prefer Green Flame Blade at lower levels. I think it's usually a lot more likely to find a second target within 5 feet than it is that the guy I hit is going to voluntarily move. At low levels, a lot of times, you're fighting like goblins and kobolds and stuff, and you're killing them in 1 or 2 hits anyways. So he's probably not going to live long enough to survive your hit and then try to run or something. It's probably just not going to make any sense. I like the Green Flame Blade a lot more in that circumstance. I also like the idea of taking a cantrip that has a saving throw involved, and usually I've said in other videos, if I had the choice between a hit roll and a saving throw on a caster, I would usually take the hit roll, because a lot of things at higher levels start getting magic resistance, giving them advantage on saving throws, or they have legendary resist, allowing them to just fail a saving throw and then just be like, no, I just choose to pass that instead, retroactively. But in the case of the Eldritch Knight, you do have the Eldritch Strike ability at level 10, and note that that's not limited to a certain number of times a day. It's not like twice per short rest or something. It's just any time you hit something with your weapon attack, you can give it disadvantage on its next saving throw against a spell you cast before the end of your next round. Not even this round, your next one. And so the fact that it's just an ongoing, unlimited thing like that means that you might as well take advantage of it. So the two I really like here are Frostbolt and Toll the Dead. Frostbolt's going to make it, it's got a 60-foot range. If they fail the saving throw, they have disadvantage on their next attack as well. So if you're trying to be like the tank type role, then that can be kind of helpful. It's also, I mean, it does have a range, but since it doesn't have a hit roll, you could use it in melee range, right? There's no hit roll on your part, so you're not going to have to worry about disadvantage. He just gets a saving throw. And I like Toll the Dead for the same reason. Plus, Toll the Dead tends to scale a lot better than most of the other cantrips, because, I mean, Frostbolt is or Firebolt's only doing a die 10, for example. A lot of the others are doing like a die 8. Toll the Dead, you're looking at a D8 if it's uninjured, but a D12 if it is injured. And, you know, that could be pretty decent. I mean, you can even use it with your War Magic to use your bonus action attack, hit something, and then Toll the Dead it. And it'll allow you to be wounded for you, taking more damage. So, that's just kind of how I'm looking at it. I probably want a range option. I like the options with the saving throw just because I can use them in melee combat without disadvantage, and it pairs nicely with my level 10 ability, giving them disadvantage on that saving throw. And then, of course, Booming Blade, Green Flint Blade are just almost must-haves, at least one of the two. And I would probably pick up the second one later on anyways, just in case I'm fighting stuff that's immune to fire, for example. At level 1, you get 3 spells. 2 of them have to be from either the Abjuration or Evocation school. And in general, this is kind of an anchor on the Eldritch Knight, in my opinion. When you compare them to other gish, hybrid, melee, caster type guys, the Paladin and the Ranger both have access to 5th level spells. You're stuck at 4th. The Blade Singer is going to have access to 9th level spells. The Pact of the Blade Warlock is going to have access to a 9th level spell. And in all those cases, they're actually much stronger casters than the Eldritch Knight. They're not limited to a couple schools like you. They have higher level spell choices than you. The Eldritch Knight is actually very poor as a spellcaster compared to these other classes. And that's not even getting into some of the crazy multi-classing that I've suggested before, like saying, combining Paladin with Sorcerer, for example, to get even higher level spell slots and combine those with your smites. You're just worse at casting spells than any of those guys. However, what you do have is that, at least in my opinion, you're even better at fighting than any of those guys. You're the only person who's going to get a 3rd attack around, let alone a 4th at 20 if it goes that high. You're going to have access to Action Surge. And yes, Paladins at low level, they're going to probably even outpace you with smites. They're going to have same number of attacks at low levels as you do, and they can throw in a smite. You've got Action Surge, but it's only once per short rest, so you got to be a little more careful with it. But once you hit level 11 and you've got a 3rd attack around, the others really just can't keep up, honestly, because your round-to-round output is higher and you still have Action Surge. The Paladin who's just dropping smites everywhere is just going to run out of juice pretty soon. The Blade Lock is still only making 2 attacks around. Yeah, he can get Life Drinker at 12, which is going to add his Charisma bonus to the damage, but he's still stuck with those 2 hits, and they're going to hit really hard, but they're just not scaling as well, because the 3rd attack around, you're going to get to add your weapon bonuses, your strength bonuses or dexterity bonuses, depending on which one you're using. If you have a weapon that does damage on hit, like maybe you have a frost blade or a flame tongue, or maybe somebody cast like elemental weapon or holy weapon on your sword, or whatever you're using, mace, axe, whatever, then those bonuses all just stack more and more and more, whereas the others, they're just a lot more limited in the amount of attacks they can make. And you can do things with them like dual wield or use a pole arm with pole arm mastery, but you can do all that too. And unlike them, you're a fighter and you're going to have 6 ability score increases or feat choices to make. So you will have a much better chance of picking up things like pole arm mastery than those other classes are going to. So while the Eldritch Knight barely deserves to have the word Eldritch in its name, it is certainly a knight. And it is one of the best tanking class type in the game. And I think this is where I would personally try to build an Eldritch Knight, because that's where they shine. So out of my 3 first level spells, 2 of them have to be from those schools. I'm going to take Shield, and I'm going to take Absorb Elements. They're both Abjuration spells. Absorb Elements, you don't need quite so much at level 1. You could maybe throw in like Magic Missile or something, and we'll talk about why in a second. But as I level up, Absorb Elements is almost must have. Shield, of course, is great. I mean, picture this. Let's say you're level 5 or 6 at this point. You've managed to save up your money and buy some decent armor. Maybe you got some plate or some half plate. You've got a shield. Maybe you took the defensive fighting style. Let's say plate, a shield, and defensive fighting style with no magical items yet. That is still 21 armor class. You cast a shield spell, you're at 26. When you're level 5 or 6 or 7, not a lot can hit 26 armor class. I mean, even 21 is hard for stuff to hit. So, unlike the barbarian who's getting hit a lot, but he's raging, so he's only taking half damage, you are just very, very difficult to injure. And when you do get hit, you still have things like a bonus action heal that you can use to recover some hit points. So I think that on the whole, this is where the Eldritch Knight really, really shines, is on the defensive end of things. And the Abjuration school is perfect for that. I'm actually kind of disappointed that Evocation is your second school, because Evocation is things like Fireball and Lightning Bolt and stuff like that. And those are great spells if you're a caster. But by the time you get 3rd level spells on an Eldritch Knight, you're already 13th level. And Fireball just isn't as good anymore as it was back when the wizard was level 5 and got it. And that's not to say that it's never bad. I've talked about Fireball before. I think it's a great spell. But the problem is that the damage on Fireball just doesn't keep up with the scaling on monster hit points. And so when you're 13th level and you're getting it for the first time, it's just not super great. But Counterspell is still amazing, even at 13th level. In fact, it probably gets better as it goes, because you fight more and more things with casting abilities. So I really just think that the Evocation side is, I don't want to call it poor design, but it's definitely just a weaker choice. You're going to do more damage usually with your melee attacks at 13th level than you will with an Evocation spell. And I mean, Fireball's kind of an exception. I'd still pick it up. When we go over spells, you'll see that it's on my list of 3rd level spells to take, because sometimes you just need a good AoE attack, and Fireball's, about as good as you're going to get when you're at that level. But, would I take a lot of damaging spells on an Eldritch Knight? No, not at all. I'd consider Magic Missile at level 1. I said I'd talk about that in a minute, and so we will. And the reason for that is because you might not have a lot of intelligence on your character. I mean, I know that intelligence is your casting stat, but notice that Shield doesn't use intelligence. Absorb Elements doesn't use intelligence. You can take spells like Booming Blade that don't use your intelligence. For your 3rd choice at level 1 that doesn't come from those 2 schools, I would probably take Find Familiar. And again, it's not going to rely on your intelligence. So while I'm not saying don't take high intelligence, I'm just saying it's very optional on this kind of character. You could build an Eldritch Knight who takes spells that almost never require a hit roll or allow a saving throw, and just take more defensive spells like Shield and Absorb Elements and Mirror Image and things along those lines, and then just be very defensive and not rely on intelligence at all. And I think that's perfectly viable. So I already gave away the secret, but for the 3rd spell I would take is definitely Find Familiar. Familiars are incredibly useful. Find Familiar is probably the best 1st level spell in the entire game, honestly. I mean, that or Healing Word, probably, if you're on the healer side of things. So, it's pretty hard to go wrong with that. You get one choice that's not from those 2 schools at level 1. It seems like a no-brainer to just take the best 1st level spell that's not from those 2 schools. Level 2, unfortunately, level 2, your options are actually worse than they were at level 1. I kind of like darkness, I guess. You can use it to help, give you a bit of CC type thing, some crowd control, shut down enemy casters that might have to rely on line of sight in order to hit you or your party. You can use it to retreat. Darkness is decent and gives you some nice flexibility. Quite like Misty Step. Yes, eventually you're going to get Misty Step for free when you action surge, but that's at 15th level. Do you really want to wait that long? You're supposed to be a frontline type of guy, probably. I mean, you could use a bow. Bows are completely viable for an Eldritch Knight as well. But I kind of feel like if you're going to go bow, you're probably going to lean more towards an Arcane Archer these days instead, since we have, Arcane Archer subclass now. So, bow's still a viable option, but you're probably more often than not going to be like a frontline type of guy, in which case getting some mobility added to your character is probably going to be a high priority. I also said I like mirror image, so it's worth pointing out all the spells you choose have to be from evocation or abjuration, except at levels 8, 14, and 20, and plus the one at level 1 I already mentioned. You get to choose a spell from any school magic of a level that you can cast. So at level 8, you can't pick a 4th level spell because you don't have 4th level spells yet. But you can pick something from 1st or 2nd level. And like I said, I like mirror image. Blur is also another strong choice. Blur might actually be even better in some ways, but it requires your concentration. However, as I mentioned before, if you have like 21 armor class or so, hitting somebody with 21 armor class while having disadvantage is almost impossible. And if you use, you're probably not going to have to use shield, but the option is even there to stack that with blur, in which case you're almost never going to get hit ever. But like I said, it requires concentration, and I kind of like the idea of mirror image instead because it doesn't require concentration. So there is that. It's worth noting that you're going to have a pretty good concentration save. I don't think I would bother with taking like Warcaster probably on this character. You could. You'll have a lot of feats available, but I just don't see there being enough good, strong spells. And just being a fighter naturally, you're probably going to have decent constitution, and you're naturally proficient on constitution saving throws. So you're probably going to be fairly good at maintaining concentration anyways, even without something like Warcaster. You might want it just so that you can do sword and shield shenanigans, so you don't have to like stow a weapon, you cast a spell, draw the weapon in the next round or anything like that. If your DM is kind of a stickler for that kind of stuff, sure. But if you're going to be using a great weapon, it specifically says you don't need it. You can hold the weapon with one hand while casting a spell with the other hand. So in that case, I think it's even less important. But I don't know if I'd take it in general anyways. 3rd level, like I said, Fireball is a pretty good choice, but really the first spell I would be looking to take on an Eldritch Knight when I get 3rd level spells is going to be Counterspell. Dispel Magic is also another really good choice, but really Counterspell is just ridiculously good. And it's such an important spell to have. Like, it's one that even if, let's say your party already has a wizard in the party and he has Counterspell, it never hurts to have a second guy who can cast Counterspell in a round. And if you're fighting some evil lich and he's about to hit the party with a wish spell or something, you're going to hope that you got more than one guy who can take a crack at that. Because if it's just one guy and you're just relying on the wizard, he could roll bad and then it's going to be a bad day for the party. Other spells I like outside of those two schools, a lot of people for their 14th level, because 14th level you're going to get one from any school, right? A lot of people talk about haste, and I do like haste. I'm going to throw Tiny Hut and Fly in there as other options, just in case somebody else doesn't have them. Tiny Hut is just an amazing spell. Like, Lima's Tiny Hut is one of the best rituals in the game. But you don't really have ritual casting. Unlike a wizard, it's still going to take you your spell slot to cast it. So hopefully you've got someone else who can cast it, is what I'm trying to get at. If they don't, then you probably want it. But if you got someone who can do it already, you don't need it. And I kind of feel the same way about fly. Fly's a nice utility spell. An archer using fly is ridiculous because then you can just crush stuff from above basically at will, and that's pretty awesome. So haste is one that I see a lot of people talk about online as being like an absolute must-have. I think that haste is probably one of your best choices at 14, but I don't think it's a must-have. And part of this I've talked about before, and that's just the mechanics of casting haste instead of attacking. By the time you're 14th level, you could be making 3 attacks a round. So if you use your action to cast haste, you've made no attacks compared to you could have made 3. Which means the next round, sure, you get 4, but you could have just made 3 again, meaning you would have had 6 attacks over 2 rounds. And then 9 over 3 compared to 8 over 3. It's not until the 4th round where the Eldritch Knight with haste is going to catch up. And the 5th round and later where he actually starts to see the advantage of haste pay off. And that's a pretty long fight. I'm not saying you'll never have fights that last 5 rounds. I'm just saying that that's a pretty big investment to, maybe I'll get to use it, maybe I don't. Now, I've talked about this before. You could always use haste and action surge, of course, and get the benefits right away. But you could have just attacked and then action surged and then attacked again. So I'm still not convinced that haste is a great choice. However, there will be times you might still want it. And that is if you couldn't have attacked in the first round anyways. Let's say you had to use your action to dash and you couldn't attack. Well, you could have just cast haste, doubled your movement, and now you can use your movement to get the same amount of distance while also having haste and getting the 2 bonus armor class and everything else that comes along with it. So there will be times when you want to use it, there will be times when it's just not that good. And as you play the character, you'll become more familiar with that. I've talked about haste before, so I don't want to spend more time on it than I already have. But, whatever. At level 4th level spells, I kind of like Fire Shield just because I don't know what else I'd really want to take there. You could take another evocation spell, getting some more AoE damage perhaps. I mean, that's not the worst thing you could do, I guess. But really, I like greater invisibility. That's probably the one I'm going to take with my 20th level spell choice selection, because then I can become invisible and attack and have advantage. The only word of caution is that if you're expected to be like the tank, the party might not really want you being invisible, because then guys just can't target you, and then they start beating on all your casters and things can get ugly. Especially at level 20, when you're probably fighting some really powerful things. And some of them might have blind sight or true sight or whatever. Anyways, so just be aware of that. But I do think that is a pretty decent choice. So I kind of hinted earlier about how I feel like the Eldritch Knight is pretty weak on the arcane side and stronger than a lot of its contemporaries on the physical side. And I do think that that is true. However, like I said before, it really doesn't start to pay off until kind of the back end, about 11 plus when you get that 3rd attack around. Now, part of the reason I say this is because I actually played an Eldritch Knight in my buddy Jaden's Tomb of Annihilation campaign. And I multi-classed it with Sorcerer. And the reason I did is because I wanted to be able to use quicken casting for, cast spells, a bonus action attack. Now, you might think, why not go Wizards? You only have 1 casting stat, and that might have been a better choice. Because this is the case where the multi-class really didn't work the way I thought it would. And it's not that it was bad. I think that had the campaign gone on longer, the character probably would have been able to fill out more and be a much better character than they were. Because it's not like the character was bad. I played a female tiefling character because it had charisma and int, and she was just a really fun, carefree character who'd like run away and join the circus, and then eventually became an adventurer and was kind of, footloose and fancy free. And she was a lot of fun to play, but it was pretty obvious to me that things like the War Magic ability to, make a bonus action attack when casting a cantrip, which looked super strong on paper, was really only good for a certain set of level ranges. And the combination of the sorcery points, like I never got high enough level as a sorcerer to have a lot of sorcery points. So the campaign ended, we were like level 10, so I had 7 levels of fighter and 3 levels of sorcerer. So I barely got sorcery points at all by the time, the campaign was done, and I'd gotten to play around with quicken casting for, a 1 game session, I think. And it was cool, but I just didn't have enough sorcery points to really make the most of it. Had the campaign gone on longer, eventually the idea was I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to level 11 and get a 3rd attack as a fighter and have 9 levels of sorcerer, which would have given me 5th level spells, or if I should go to just stay at 7th level and go to 13th sorcerer, which would have given me 7th level spells. The nice thing about combining it with a pure caster is that then you're not limited to only taking most of your spells from 2 schools. You now have any of the spells from that school that is bringing in. And you're still gaining some extra bonus spell slots here and there too. I mean, you're only a 3rd caster, not even a half caster like paladins and rangers. So don't expect your Eldritch Knight to contribute a lot to your overall spell casting level. But, there is something there. And you could go like 8-12 if you wanted the extra feat, for example, or 12-8, whatever. So that was one option. I think going with a wizard, especially if you went with the abjuration school, so you could get the ward, your abjuration ward, and then every time you cast shield or absorb elements, it's replenishing the ward. So I think that's a pretty strong combination, and you can do the same thing there with those same cutoffs, either 7th level fighter or 11th level fighter. You get a bunch of casting levels from wizard, and again, then you're not going to be limited. But honestly, the more I look at it, I think if you wanted to play a more arcane heavy melee character, you're probably just better off playing a paladin or a bladelock. The Eldritch Knight really is more of a fighter. He's like 80% fighter with a 20% magic he's throwing in. The others are much more balanced. But that doesn't mean that the Eldritch Knight is bad, because like I said before, he is better at the fighting part than the others. So if you want to be a guy who spends most of the time in melee but can add shield and absorb elements and maybe picks up counterspell and mirror image or maybe alarm just for a bit of versatility, and you have a familiar but you're 99% of the time just swinging a sword in combat, there's nothing wrong with that. That can be a very solid character. And I think that you're going to make a better meat shield damage sponge type than any of the other fighter archetypes, at least once in the player's handbook. Champion is more about crit damage and more, along that lines. The Battle Master has a lot of different options which can help him to be very tanky as well. But nothing that really competes with just an at-will reaction ability to give yourself 5 more armor class, or just decide I'm suddenly resistant to damage from this particular element, so I'm just going to take half. Oh, I get a saving throw for quarter damage, and I have Indomitable, so I can roll that saving throw a second time if I miss it. It's just way better in that type of role than any of the others. And so the idea of combining the heavy armor with the shield and the shield spell, absorb elements, these kind of things to make yourself just as hard to hit as possible, while also adding in, you can take things like the shield mastery feat, where you can bash a guy with a shield, knock him prone, and if you're in a fairly melee heavy party, now all those allies are going to have advantage to hit him as well. Just be aware that your range guys are going to have disadvantage, so keep that in mind if you're going to start using that feat quite liberally. But the point is, you have a lot of things you can do on this class. It's just that a lot of them don't tend to involve using a lot of magic. I think Levitate's an okay choice as well for the same reasons as Fly. Except you can use Levitate offensively, but it does allow a saving throw in that case. And like I said, you might not have a really high intelligence. I think a lot of times when you're building class, racial choices don't necessarily matter much, but I kind of feel like they matter a little more in this case, because I probably don't want to use a lot of ability score increases on my intelligence. If I start with like a 12 or 14 intelligence, I'm probably just going to leave it there because I'm going to concentrate on strength. I'm going to concentrate on or dex, right? Or constitution and feats. And I'm probably just going to go with whatever I started with. So if you want to go with a dex based, I really like the high elf. You get the bonus at cantrip at level 1 as well, which is quite nice. And then you're going to have the 2 dex with the 1 intelligence, which is going to be very good. Especially if you're going to go with like a bow, I think that would be a very strong choice for a character. But even if you're going with a dex-based fighter in melee range, then I think that High Elf is a very, very strong choice. Very inhuman, as always. I mean, you could go with gnomes. They have the bonus intelligence, and they're pretty good along those lines. But something like a half-orc would be a great choice, too. I mean, let's not forget, you're still a fighter. And half-orc's going to get, or Goliath, anything like that, where you're going to get strength, you're going to get con, you can, just put your intelligence at like 12 or 14 or whatever, like I said. And, if you're going with plate mail armor, you could dump dex or you could dump charisma or whatever, dump one of the other stats. Just have a mediocre int and use almost nothing that's going to give saving throws or require hit rolls. And I think that's a perfectly viable way to play the character. For feats, it might be tempting to start trying to grab a bunch of the spellcasting feats. I do think there's something like Elemental Adept, if you're using Green Flame Blade constantly, could be worthwhile. But in general, I would probably stay clear of the caster type feats because you're just not a great caster. That's just all there is to it. So I think that you're probably better off concentrating on things like melee feats. I like the mobile feat on this character a lot. You're already kind of combining a bit of mobility through things like your Misty Step or your level 15 teleport ability that you get. You've got Action Surge, so you can be able to, dash and still attack all in one round of combat and stuff. So you can be a very mobile character, and I like the idea of just playing into that even more. So I think that that's a very strong choice. As I've mentioned in many videos, I think Alert is one of the best feats in the entire game. I don't know that it's so necessary on this type of character. I'm not really looking to take a lot of battlefield control spells, and if I'm just going to be basically a mate shield, it's fine to let the enemies come to me and have a low initiative score. Let the fast guys get off their CCs and their damage spells and the stuff they need to do, and then you just kind of mop up the scraps, and that's fine. I do like lucky. You don't really want to be incapacitated by an unlucky saving throw. That was not meant to be a pun, but or just a bad dice roll in general. And lucky is an amazingly strong feat, so I kind of like that one on this type of character. There's a bunch of good ones, of course, all the usual suspects, to be honest. But like I said, I do think that things like Warcaster are a lot more optional on this character than they are on, say, like a Paladin, for example, who wants to be concentrating on a lot of spells and doesn't have Constitution as a proficiency bonus. Same with Resilient Con. You don't need it because you're already proficient on con saves. And so I think that allows you to have a bit of extra room of where you want to put stuff. And then just being a fighter in general and having the extra ability score increases is going to give you more room for there too. So basically, just to sum things up, this is one of the rare cases where I think if you're going to play an Eldritch Knight, you probably just want to just play a straight Eldritch Knight, to be honest. I don't see that the multi-classing is necessarily going to be as big a factor for the Eldritch Knight as it is in the other cases. Usually, I'm looking to add other things that this class is missing, but in this case, the thing you're really missing is magic, even though you're an Eldritch Knight. And if you really wanted more magic, I think things like the Pact of Blade Warlock, the Paladin Sorcerer, or Paladin Warlock multi-classes, those type of things, just a straight up Paladin, those kind of things are all going to give you more of the magic and are going to be a lot stronger in that case. The Eldritch Knight really excels at tanking and hitting stuff with lots of attacks, and you might as well just play into that. So anyways, those are my thoughts on the Eldritch Knight. I really enjoyed the Eldritch Knight I played. I kind of wish I hadn't multi-classed it, but in a way I'm kind of glad actually, because then, you know, you can learn from my mistakes, right? It was one where on paper it seemed good, but then when I tried it I was like, it's okay. But it partly led into my Paladin Sorcerer multi-class that I talked about in a different video, which was a great character, and was, you know, kind of looking at this one and seeing what I did wrong and where I could make improvements. So learn from my mistake. Don't multi-class with a sorcerer. Just play something else. Just go with the fighter. Have fun with the fighter. They can be still a lot of fun. I played to fighter 7 straight through, and she was a great character. There was nothing wrong with any of that. So anyways, those are my thoughts. If you have your own thoughts though, feel free to leave comments in the comment section. As always, I promise to read all the comments, and also feel free to like and subscribe and ring the bell and all that other good stuff. And I'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye.